This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about provider block. With respect to provider block, we were understanding about using an AWS provider and what are the various ways we can authenticate with AWS using this provider block. One is you can specify the region under which region you want to manage your resources using Terraform. Then you have various ways access key and secret key. You are a user, you can use access key and you can use secret key option where you can define your access key, your user access keys and secret keys to authenticate and authorize with AWS to create a resources. But if we check in these things into the version control system, it's not a correct way. So there are various other ways we can authenticate with AWS from Terraform using provider. Guys, this is AWS concept. This is AWS concept. People might be thinking this is Terraform concept. People might be thinking it's a Terraform concept, but it's an AWS concept. Balaji is saying screen I'm not able to see. Are you guys not able to see my screen? What about others? Okay, maybe Balaji has some issue. Maybe let him check from his side. Okay, so people might be thinking, sir, this is something to do with the Terraform. No, authentication and authorization concept is AWS. Terraform is internally communicating with AWS APIs using AWS provider. So you need to authenticate. If you know AWS IAM concepts, right? If you know AWS IAM concept, there is a users, there is a roles, policies, right? Now you can use user programmatic access using access keys and secret keys. That is one option. First option, you can define your access keys and secret keys. I hope you know what is access key, what is secret key. This is nothing to do with the Terraform. You guys know IAM, right? In IAM, can you use can you generate an access key and secret key for a programmatically managing the resources? Yes. So you can generate those access keys and secret key for Terraform to use to work with AWS. You can pass those details. This is one option. Otherwise, you provide the same details as an environment variable. You provide the same details as an environment variable. So you export like this. You export like this in the terminal. In the terminal or in the command prompt, wherever you are running your Terraform scripts, credentials can be provided by using these environment variables. Environment variables. Or another approach is one more approach is this credentials and configuration file. Again, this is nothing to do with Terraform. AWS CLI. When you guys use AWS CLI, can we configure our AWS CLI using AWS configure command with the default profile or custom profile? Yes. So you can use the credential files or configuration files generated by your AWS CLI when you guys executed AWS configure command. Someone was asking yesterday, sir, what is the difference between configuration file and credential file? It's a AWS concept. If you see AWS CLI, right? AWS shared configurations and credentials. So it's a AWS concept. So when you use AWS CLI, the shared AWS config and credential files contain set of profiles. This config and credential files contain set of profiles. Profile is nothing but a configuration values that can be referenced from the SDK tool using its profile name. So your access keys and secret keys are attached to profile in order to configure some aspect of AWS resources. So as general, any value that you place in the shared credential file can alternatively placed in the config file, right? So this credentials file or config file will be generated by your AWS CLI. This is nothing to do with the Terraform. When this will be generated? When you execute AWS configure, right? It will ask access key. It will ask access key. It will ask a secret key. And while configuring, you can give the profile name, something like this. If you don't give the profile name, what is the default profile name? We discussed already, even though yesterday also I discussed. What is the profile name? Even though you might not be familiar with AWS concept, that's why I discussed. What is the default profile name? The default. So you are configuring AWS CLI with this profile. These credentials details will be part of that config file and credential file. This credentials will be part of that config file and credential file. Here they have given a documentation also. In the Terraform also they have given a documentation. So shared config files. The credentials can be provided. The AWS provider can source the credentials and other settings from shared configuration file. By default, these files are located in this one and this location. If no named profile is specified, if there is no profile for the name, there is no named profile is specified, the default profile is used. And use the profile parameter or AWS profile environment variable to specify the named profile. The locations of the shared credential and configuration files is part of these things. In Windows, Mac, in Linux and Mac, it is part of these things. In Windows, you have some in these things. So you can use those details like this. Let's say if you have these things in a different path, let's say you have these things in a different path instead of user home directory. Instead of user home directory, it is in a different path. You need to provide like this. You need to provide like this. Yesterday I have done that one using AWS CLI. Let me show that. Yesterday we executed AWS configure command. Yesterday I have executed AWS configure command. If you see in this local laptop, in my user home directory, there is some folder called .aws. You can see there is something called .aws. In my user home directory, there is something called .aws. Within that .aws, there is a config file, there is a credential file. There is a config file, there is a credential file. So this config file contains your profile details. And your credential file contains the credentials of that profile. It just contains profile, and this credential file contains the details of that profile. So even though we are not specifying like this, where exactly it will check? That is what they are mentioning. Where they are going to check by default? By default, where these files are located? If it is a Linux and Mac, people might be thinking this is a Terraform concept. This is not Terraform concept. It's a AWS concept. Where these files will be there? .home. I mean to say home directory here. So do you have these files? And there is a default profile. So in my Terraform code, in my Terraform code, I can specify that profile name. Even though I don't specify anything, suppose if I don't specify this profile also, what is the profile? It will try to look internally. by that AWS provider? Default. So do I have that profile? Do I have that profile and its credentials in these two files? Do I have a profile in this file and the profile credentials in this file already in my system where I am running Terraform commands? Yes. Because of that, it is going to use those profile details and credentials details from that credentials file. Is everyone clear how it is working that profile? Now let me go to the Terraform folder. Guys, this is Terraform, not Terraform concept. Actually, this is AWS concept because you know AWS, right? Already. Terraform lab. Let me go to this Terraform EC2. Now this is my Terraform configuration. I have nowhere specified the profile also, but I have a profile. I have a profile. I already configured a profile. AWS configure. If you see, I already have a profile configured. I already have a AWS provider that the profile configure, right? So the default profile is already there. You can see the default profile access key and secret key is already there. Now, since we have not mentioned anything, it is going to look for a default profile. Let me say Terraform plan. It is using the default profile which is configured, and the profile credentials is part of the credential file. The profile credentials is part of the credential file, and the profile name is part of that profile file. But let's say you have that with a different name. Your profile is with a different name. Let me show that. Let me show that. Let me remove that file. Let me remove that .aws folder where I have that config file and credential file. Now, if I run Terraform plan, there is no default profile in the default files. There is no default profile in the default files. That's why again it is not going to work because I deleted that file, the credentials file. So it is not there. But if I configure Terraform with a different, I mean to say AWS with a different profile, let's say hyphen profile, hyphen profile, I am saying Terraform like this instead of default Terraform like that I am giving Terraform or Terraform profile. Now the access key, let me get that access key whatever we have used yesterday. We created one IAM user, right? Let me use this access key. Let me use that secret key to configure that AWS profile. Default region you can leave it or you can say AP South 1. Now if you see there is a AWS folder created and there is a config file, there is a profile with that name, and the credentials file has a credentials of that profile, and in our resource this provider tag, since it's not a default profile, I can refer like this. But again, if your configuration file and that credential file is in a different path, you can give like this also. Instead of that directory, if it is there in a different directory, you can give these details also. You can give these details also. If it is in a different right, you have a different path, this one is in a different path, you can give this one also. And you have this file in a different path, instead of that user home directory, you can give like this also. But since they are in a default path, we are not giving these options. Clear? This is nothing to do with the Terraform. This is the provider is expecting some the other way. You need to pass the AWS access keys and secret keys. Clear? What do you mean by this access key and secret key, that config file, credential file? Guys, there is a detailed documentation in AWS. You have to be comfortable in AWS. That's what I already told. Is everyone clear? Still any doubt here? Even though I don't give this one, this is checking those files from that default path only. I no need to give like this. This is getting from the default path because that have in the default path. Now let me say Terraform plan. It is using that access key and secret key, which is part of this credential file, and the profile details is part of the config file. Clear? Even though we discussed yesterday, a lot of people has lot of doubts on this one. This is AWS concept. You can create a profile in the AWS CLI. Whatever works for you, you can use. Okay. Then if it is a role, IAM role, if there is a role, you can give the something like this. There is something called role, and here you can give your role ARN. Suppose you have a IAM role. Suppose you are executing this Terraform scripts. You are executing this Terraform scripts in one of the AWS EC2 instance. Instead of using access keys and secret keys, you can use the role ARN, and you attach that IAM role to EC2 where you are running your Terraform script instead of using access key and secret key. That is also defined here. That is also they have given ARN. Something like this, you can use your role ARN. Is everyone clear? The different ways we can pass, or you can pass your AWS configurations to the Terraform. Still, you guys have any doubt, any queries? People are still with this one only. Are you guys clear? What is this? Any doubt still, let me know. So that if you are clear this one, we can proceed with resources. You need to be good in AWS before learning Terraform. That's why we discussed AWS first. Are you guys clear?
Sir, one doubt, sir, Balaji here. So, is this a real time we will use the role, attaching the role and things, because that file we will, it will be clear form, right? The credential access key
So
and
if
secret
you know
key.
the concept, right, you can use access key and secret key also. I told yesterday, you can set those access keys and secret keys as an environment variable, right? Instead of defining your access key and secret key in the provider block, right? You can set like this also, environment variables. From before you run Terraform commands, you export like this. This is also works because you don't set like this. You don't have like this in the code, but can you pass something like this also before you run Terraform commands? I shown that one also yesterday. Yes, this will work. But role, suppose you are running Terraform scripts in your local laptop. Understand? Suppose you are running Terraform scripts in your local laptop. Will you guys able to attach role to your local laptop to use role first of all? Local laptop or desktop? Anyone can answer this one who has AWS knowledge. Does role will work with
No,
a
sir.
developer machine? No.
Yeah,
So in
role
that
will not work in the local laptop. Thank you.
role will only with AWS services. If you want to grant permissions to the AWS services, not only Bastion host, that can be any server. Suppose this is your CI/CD server. Let's say you have one server, one EC2 instance. If you want to run Terraform scripts from that EC2 instance instead of local laptop or local desktop, suppose you want to run your Terraform scripts on EC2 instance. So in that case, you can create a IAM role and attach that IAM role to that EC2 instance, and you use that role ARN. You use that role ARN in your Terraform code. So since you attach that role to that EC2, that Terraform running on that EC2 can talk to the AWS using that role. I hope you are already understood, already have a background about what is role, where we can use role, where you can use users. AWS concepts. Let's say already you have a EC2 instance in AWS. Can you run Terraform scripts from that EC2 also instead of, now I am running Terraform scripts from my local laptop, but can I run the Terraform scripts from AWS services itself? Yes. In that case, we can use role. Suppose you have Terraform scripts in version control system. You have Terraform scripts in a version control system, SCM. This Terraform scripts can be executed by developer like me, Balaji, or DevOps guy, or admin like me. Now, I can get the Terraform script, I can run. But here, can we use role with this guy's system? This is a DevOps guy, or a developer, or an admin, let's say. This is developer laptop or desktop. Can we attach IAM role to this server, first of all, to use IAM role in your Terraform configurations here? Guys, AWS concepts. We discussed what is role, where we can use role, where we can use user. So this is a DevOps guy or admin. We can't use user here. We can't use role here. Only acts that users. But the same Terraform scripts, suppose this is EC2. From this, I can run Terraform script. But when I am running Terraform script from this EC2, instead of using access keys and secret keys, can I define role, and can I use role because I can attach the IAM role to this EC2. I can attach IAM role, and that IAM role you can use in your Terraform configuration. Clear? That role ARN, what role you attach to that server, that role ARN you give it, so that Terraform will use that role, whatever role you attach it to that server, and it is going to use that role to talk to the AWS. But if I use something like this role, and if I run the script here, do you think it will work? No. This is AWS concept, guys. Nothing to do with the Terraform. Role you need to understand, user you need to understand. Clear? All the different ways you can use. Suppose you are running locally, you can use access keys and secret keys in the code, or access key, profile in your AWS CLI. You configure AWS CLI and use that profile. Or if you are running the Terraform scripts from CI/CD tools, and that CI/CD servers are already AWS instances, you can use role concept there. Clear? Still doubts? This is AWS concept. Whoever practiced AWS CLI and AWS IAM, they can understand these things easily. First of all, do you have a background about AWS? Let me ask this question. Do you have a knowledge about AWS, first of all, IAM concepts? How many have AWS background, IAM background? So this is how basically it works. If you know IAM concept, right? Terraform requires permissions to talk to the AWS, right? Without authentication and authorization, does Terraform will allow you to create, update, delete any resource in AWS? No. So we are defining the user details or the role details using provider block. The users will work different way, role will work different way. Now I am using user for what reason? Because I am running Terraform configurations from my local laptop. I am using Terraform configurations from my local laptop. So I am a user. I am a user of AWS, like a developer or DevOps guy. So I need to pass my access keys and secret keys some or the other way. In the Terraform configuration, you can pass, or you can configure AWS CLI, and you can use that profile. That can be a default profile or custom profile, or you set it as an environment variable, that access key or secret key. If it is an AWS service already, you use role. I hope you are clear now, everyone. Okay, if everyone is clear, let's proceed. Now, throughout the session, most of the time I will be running my Terraform scripts. Throughout the session, I will be running the Terraform scripts locally only from my local laptop. So I am going to use this profile like this. Otherwise, default profile also fine. Clear? Throughout the Terraform session, I will be running Terraform scripts from my local laptop. So I am using this profile which I have configured in my local laptop using AWS CLI. I configured that profile. I'm using that profile throughout the session. You should not have any doubt again future. That's why I'm saying throughout the session, I will be running my Terraform configurations from my local laptop. That profile details I have defined in the AWS provider. So AWS provider will use this profile access key and secret key for authentication and authorization. Okay. Now let's proceed. Do you guys still have any doubt on these two before I proceed? Feel free to ask any question, but don't have a doubts in your mind, and don't in the future don't get confused. What is this? What is this? Okay. I'm taking your silence as you don't have any doubt. Let's proceed with this concept. Even though I have explained multiple times, let me explain. This is the important block in Terraform configuration. This is very important block in the Terraform configuration, that is resource block. Using resource block, you can create any resource which that provider supports. You can create any type of resource based on the whatever provider you are using. I am using AWS provider and I am creating a resource using this resource block. This is the resource type. This is the resource type which I am managing using Terraform with the help of this provider. So provider name hyphen resource type is the standard format here, and this is like a local name. This is like a local name to that resource. That is like a local name to the resource in Terraform. So I already told resource syntax, syntax. So this is resource type. This is resource type. It is going to determine the kind of the infrastructure object. Whatever I have highlighted, that is resource type. It is going to determine the kind of infrastructure object it manages and what arguments and other attributes that resource supports. Now here you are giving a name. This is like a label or name. Resource local name. Resource local name we already discussed. It is used to refer, this resource local name can be used to refer this resource from elsewhere in the same Terraform module. There is no significance outside of that module scope. This resource name, local name, the resource local name, the resource type and the name together will serve as an identifier for a given resource. Must be unique within the module. I already told this has to be unique within the module. Not only for this resource. Suppose you are creating something else. Suppose you are creating AWS VPC. Let's say you are creating AWS VPC like this, and you are giving a CIDR for that VPC, something like this. Can I have resource name like this in the same module? Can I have another resource given with same name like this? Even though this is different resource type, can I have like this one and this one same? Guys, in last sessions we already discussed, I want to be proactive, not silent. I already discussed all these things. I am asking a question. Can I have something like this? I want you guys to be proactive, not silent. No. So if you want to validate, what command you can use, whether the syntax is correct, the Terraform configurations are syntactically correct or not, what command you can use? Format is going to format the code, not validation. So format, suppose you have not properly have the indentation like this. Suppose you have something like this. Is it looking good for better readability? Is it looking good if you have something like this? Is it having a better readability if you have something like this? No. So if you have code like this, you can format the code using Terraform format. So if I run Terraform format, it will format this like this, Terraform FMT format. Now it has formatted properly. Do you see? Is it properly formatted, that code? The Terraform configuration code. Format is different, validate is different. So what I need to use to validate whether the Terraform configurations are syntactically correct or not? Terraform validate command. Terraform validate command. If you see, let me say Terraform plan. Let me say Terraform plan. It is going to show what resources needs to be added. It is going to show what resources needs to be added. But here, I told one point. I told one point. The resource type and name, the resource type and name together serves as a identifier. The resource type and name together serves as an identifier. So now, why it is not giving error? Why it is not giving error? Even though this name is same, why it is not giving error? I told one point, if you guys remember, the resource type and name together serves as an identifier, so it must be unique. So even though it is not, even though this is same, why it is not throwing error? Because is the resource type is same, the name given for this and name given for this, is it same? No. But let me give something like this. Let me give something like this. AWS instance only. AWS instance only. Let me say something like this. Maybe T2 dot medium something else. Now, is it going to cause the error now? Because resource type and name together serves as an identifier. It must be unique. So now, is it going to throw error now? If I say Terraform plan, is it throwing error? Is it throwing error now? Resource type and name should be served as a unique identifier in that module. It is throwing error. So is this can be same now when you are dealing same resource types? Can I use same names for same resource types? No. But in this case, can I use something else? Can I use something else like this? Yes. So now if I say Terraform plan, something like this. This is very, very important concept, guys. Resource block is a backbone of Terraform. Resource block is a backbone of Terraform. What is resource block? I have already explained in detail. What is resource block. Resources are the most important element in the Terraform language. Each resource block describe one or more infrastructure objects, right? Resource block declares the resource of a given type and a local name. The name is used to refer this resource somewhere else in the same module, but no significance outside that module. The resource type and name together, serves as an identifier for a given resource, it must be unique within the module. This is what we discussed. The resource type and name together serves as an identifier for a given resource, so it must be unique within the module. So if I have something like this, is it unique? The resource type and the name should be unique within the module. So is it unique now? If I have something like this, two resources of same type with same name, problem. Two resources of same type with same name is a problem. If it is like this, no issue. Clear this point? Is everyone clear on this point? Now, what is this? Let's remove this. Let's remove this. For better understanding, let's go one by one only. Now I have given like this. What is this within this? What is this flower brackets? We already discussed. Within that block body, that is like a resource block body or arguments, we can say. Within that block body, between these flower brackets, we are going to define the arguments for the resource. We are going to define the arguments for that resource. So most of the arguments of this section is depend on the resource type only. Here, if I give ABC, do you think it will understand? If I give XYZ, do you think it will understand by Terraform? For this resource type, if I give argument name as ABC, XYZ, do you think it will understand by Terraform? No. So these argument names is based on the resource type. These argument names are based on the resource type. If I say Terraform plan, it will throw error. It will throw error. Is it saying an argument named ABC is not expected here? An argument with XYZ is not expected here, because these arguments within this resource body, within this resource block, you are going to define argument names and argument values. These argument names are specific to this resource type, specific to this resource type. So where we can define, where we can find what arguments we can use for that resource type based on this, where we can find what arguments we can use for this resource type. We discussed already in the previous sessions, where we can find the list of arguments, that is in the provider documentation. That is in the provider documentation. So here I am creating this type of resource, AWS underscore instance. AWS underscore instance resource I am creating. AWS underscore instance, this resource. Now you can see provides an AWS EC2 instance resource. This will allow instance to be created, updated, and deleted. So here, what arguments we can use? They are giving AMI, availability zone, like this. There are various options. Availability zone, instance type, launch template, key name, right? Network interface, placement group, private IP, security groups, like this. There are various subnet ID, tags, user data. You can pass user data. You can use tags, like this. These are the list of arguments. Given for that resource. But in general, if you take any resource, not only AWS instance type, in general, you take any Terraform resource, they will have arguments. And arguments are again two types. One is mandatory arguments and another one is optional arguments. So if it is a mandatory arguments, if I don't define those arguments and its value, does Terraform will again work? Does Terraform will be able to create or update that resource if there are some mandatory arguments and I am not passing those mandatory arguments? No. If there are some mandatory arguments, if I am not passing those mandatory arguments, Terraform will not work. It will not able to create. Now AMI they are saying optional. AMI they are saying optional, but required unless this is specified. Since we have not specified launch template, then this becomes mandatory. So that's why we are defining AMI. This is the argument name. This is the argument name. The value. This we call it as an argument value or expression. This we call it as an argument value, or it can be an expression. Now I am defining some value and instance type. Instance type. I am specifying only some minimal arguments here. There is something called instance type. Instance type. Instance type. This is optional, but it is required if this is not specified like that. So instance type. I can specify instance type. What type of instance you need to create? I am saying instance type t2.micro. I'll come to this meta arguments later. I'll come to this meta arguments later. If required, I can give the tags. This is also an argument for that resource. Tags. This is also an argument. Tags. Map of tags to assign to the resources. So you can define tags. You can define tags something like this. Tags, key and value. If required, you can specify some list of availability zones, something like this availability zone. You can say AP South, AP South, AP South 1A, AP South 1A. Like this, based on your requirement, you can specify the arguments. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by this? This is an argument name. It's a value or expression for that argument. Is everyone clear? The resource block, what do you mean by all these things? Based on your requirement, you can define whatever arguments you need. Now, the resource behavior. The resource behavior. Here I have explained already all these things. I don't want to explain again and again. This we discussed almost 4 or 5 times. Each resource is associated with a resource type, which is going to determine what kind of object it is going to manage and what arguments that resource supports. So each resource type belongs to some provider, which is internally a Terraform plugin. And arguments. Most of the arguments within the body of a resource block is specific to that resource only. The resource type documentation is going to show you what arguments are available and how their value should be formatted. Also, they have given in the documentation only. And there are some meta arguments. I'll come to this meta arguments later. There are some meta arguments also that are defined by Terraform itself. We can apply these meta arguments for all the resource types. And there is a documentation for resource type in the Terraform provider only. Resource behavior. We already discussed how Terraform applies the configuration. In yesterday's session also we discussed. Let's understand one more time how Terraform applies the configuration. Right? So the Terraform will apply the configuration like this, right? When Terraform creates an infrastructure object, when Terraform creates any new infrastructure object represented by a resource block, that is going to be part of your state file. It is allowing to be updated or destroyed in response in future changes. So for the resource blocks that already have an associated object in the state file, Terraform compares the actual configuration of the object within the arguments given in a configuration. If necessary, it will update the object to match the desired configuration. As I already told, Terraform will create a resource. that exist in the configuration, but they are not associated with real infrastructure in the Terraform state. Now, this is one resource in the Terraform configuration. This is one resource in the Terraform configuration. This is one resource block. And Terraform will create a resource that exists in the configuration, but that is not associated with real infrastructure in the state. So in the state file, you don't have anything. In the state file, you don't have anything. As of now, there is a state file, but you don't have any resource mapping in the state file. So this is there. The resource is exist in configuration, but it is not associated in a real infrastructure. So when I say Terraform apply, it is going to create a resource with this information. So let me show that. Let me show that. Let me show that. Terraform plan. It is saying one resource to add. It is saying one resource to add. One to add. One resource to add. It is comparing. It is comparing the Terraform configuration file with real infrastructure resources with the help of state file. Now it is saying this will be created because the configuration is there in the Terraform code, but there is no real object for that infrastructure resource in the state. So if I say Terraform apply, if I say Terraform apply, it is going to create a resource. This is what we discussed yesterday, but again I am explaining so that you can be more clear. But how Terraform is contacting AWS? How Terraform is contacting AWS? Using this provider, AWS provider, Terraform is contacting the AWS with the help of these configurations. We informed the region is this and use this profile. The access keys and configured secret keys configured for this profile. It is going to use that for contacting AWS. Let's say Terraform apply. Now, if I go to AWS, I can see that resource is getting created. That resource is getting created. The resource is getting created here. Let me refresh. Let me keep on refresh. The EC2 instance is getting created as per this resource configurations. As per this resource configuration, it is getting created. Let's see. Let's see. Now, do you see this server getting created t2.micro using that AMI? Since I have mentioned availability zone, is it created? Is it created that instance in that availability zone only as per my Terraform arguments, Terraform resource arguments? Is it creating this instance in same availability zone only? 1A? Yes. So the first one, for the first one, for the first time when you are running Terraform plan, it is going to compare and see whether there is a resource already there. If it is not there, it is going to create the first one. It is going to create a resource that exists in the configuration, but it is not associated within a real infrastructure object. But once we run the Terraform apply, it is going to generate the state file. It is going to generate the state file. Let's understand the state file. Let's understand the state file first. It is the primary core thing for the Terraform to function. State file is core. The state file is very important for Terraform to function properly. In a short way, what I can say, it is like a database. The state file is like a database for Terraform. For Terraform, state file is like a database. In a short way, what I can say, it is the underlying database containing the resources information which are provisioning using Terraform. In a simple terminology, what I can say, the state file is like a database for Terraform. That state file contains resources information which are provisioning using Terraform. Now, if you see, after Terraform provision the infrastructure resource, do you see the state file is updated where all the resource details are captured? What type of resource, the local name of that resource, what provider has been used, and the AMI which we have provided, and the instance type which we have given, and the availability zone. But various other things came to know after applying only. So it is maintaining the state of each resource in the state file. The primary purpose of the state file, the primary purpose of the state file is it is going to bind, it is going to bind the objects in a remote system and resources instances you have defined in your configuration. So it is going to compare, the state file purpose is Terraform is going to compare the resource configurations or resource blocks, you can say. The resource blocks or resource configurations you have defined in the Terraform code, it is going to compare these resource configurations with the actual resources which is maintained in the state file. It is going to compare. The primary purpose of this state file is to compare, the resources in the actual infrastructure and the resources declared in your configuration, like a desired state and current state. Now, if there are any changes to this resource configurations, if there are any changes to this resource configuration, if I say Terraform apply, what it is going to do? If I change any configurations, let's say I'm adding some additional tag, let's say I'm adding some additional tag, let's say tag I am giving environment, and I'm saying dev like this. Now I updated the resource configurations or Terraform configurations, you can say. I updated the desired state, but if you see, there is a state file. There is a state file. It is maintaining each and every state in the state file. You don't see that tags because this is what initially created. Now this is what I am expecting. Now when I say Terraform plan, is it going to say one need to be updated like that, one resource needs to be updated like that? Now it is saying one to change. So Terraform plan is saying in update in place, Terraform will perform the following action. It is going to update your resource. How it is come to know that this has to be updated, this has to be destroyed like that? Terraform is comparing your Terraform configuration code with the real infrastructure, that where that real infrastructure information is maintained or stored, whatever is already provisioned, where it is maintaining in the state file. It is maintaining in the state file. So it is comparing the real infrastructure resource with your desired configurations, then it is preparing a plan. Now if I say Terraform apply hyphen auto approve, it is going to update the resource. So if you see this point, one more point which I have already explained, update in place resources, those arguments have changed. Now is it falling this category? Is it updating in place? I mean to say, is it updating in place resources where the arguments has been changed? Now since I have modified the arguments, when I am applying, is it changing the resource in place? In place in the sense, it is not going to delete and again create. In place upgrade, in place update, is it doing that now? This point, second point, now this third point, is it doing this? Updating in place where the arguments have been changed? Yes. If you see, it has updated, one to change, it has modified. it has modified. This is modified. And again, that information is again updated in the state file. If I go to state file, again it has captured that one. But without changing any arguments, if I run n number of times, it is going to say 0 to add, 0 to change, 0 to destroy. 0 to add, 0 to destroy. If required, I can modify the instance type also. Instead of t2.micro, I am saying now t2.medium. Is this resource is going to be updated? Again, when I say Terraform plan, you can see that it is going to prepare an execution plan. Now, again, it is an in-place update. Your resource is not going to be destroyed. It is going to kind of update, but in the background, it will stop and start. It will stop that instance and it will start the instance. That is how AWS works. In AWS also, you guys manually stop the server and change the instance type like that, right? So here also, the Terraform provider is going to make a API calls to change the instance type, and it is going to stop the instance, change the instance type, and start. Now let me show Terraform. Apply now. Terraform apply. This is going to happen now. Same. The resource arguments I have modified, so it is making update, in place update. Since I have modified the arguments, did I modify the arguments here from t2.micro to t2.medium, the argument value? Yes. So that's why it is updating. Now you can see, let me refresh. You can see the instance is going to be stopped. The instance is going to be stopped. The instance is going to be stopped and again started by changing the instance type. You can see this one is changed. I have to press yes. Because I have not used auto approve. So it is getting modified. From t2.micro to t2.medium. So if you see, Terraform is internally using AWS provider, basically kind of a AWS APIs. So it is modifying that instance type because I have modified the argument value. So it has stopped the server. Then t2.micro became t2.medium. t2.micro become t2.medium. Then it is starting. Again, it's a in-place update only. But let's say sometimes it will destroy and recreate the resource. Sometimes it is going to destroy and recreate the resources. Those arguments have changed but cannot be updated in place. It is going to destroy and recreate the resource whose arguments have changed but which cannot be updated in place due to some limitations, due to remote API limitation. Just to give an example, let's say here I want to change the instance, this availability zone. Currently it is in 1A. Now I am changing this to 1B. If it is a availability zone, is it going to do in place update? Which means, is that server availability zone can be updated without deleting completely? No. Now let me show you. As of now it is in 1A. That instance. Now I change the availability zone to 1B. Let me show Terraform plan. Let me show Terraform plan. Now, if you see, you read here, one to add, one to destroy. Why it is saying one to add, one to destroy? It is saying one to add, one to destroy. Why it is need to destroy? Because this cannot be do in place update. You see now, what it is saying, instead of in place update, what it is saying now, this has to be, what it is saying, replaced. Why it has to replace? Because this availability zone expects a force replacement, because you can't change the availability zone of the instance. So it has to be deleted and recreated, because availability zone expects a force replacement. Currently, the current resource is in 1A availability zone. I am expecting in 1B, that is expecting a force replacement. Now, if I say Terraform apply, let's see, it will be replaced. It will be replaced. Now, this is in 1A availability zone. Now I am saying 1B. This will be completely replaced. This will be completely replaced. Keep a note of this instance ID. Keep a note of this instance ID. It will be completely replaced. This is the current instance ID. Or you see the launch time. You see the launch time also. You see the launch time when it is launched, right? It will be kind of a replacement. It is kind of a replacement only. It is kind of a replacement only. Now let's say Terraform apply. Terraform apply hyphen auto approve. I am saying auto approve. So I don't want to say yes like that. Now you see this will be terminated. This will be deleted. This will be deleted and again created. If you see, it is getting shut down. It is going to be terminated. It is going to be terminated. It is going to be terminated. And again, it is going to be created. Again, it is going to be created. It is getting terminated. It is getting terminated completely. Terminated. It is completely terminated, deleted. That is what the meaning of replaced. It is getting replaced. Now, am I getting in 1B availability zone now? That instance here, 1B availability zone with the T2 dot medium using that AMI, this one. Because of this is expecting a replacement. Is everyone clear on this point also? On this point also, is everyone clear? What do you mean by this destroy and recreate resources when some arguments have changed but cannot be updated in place due to some remote API limitation? Because AWS will not allow you to change the availability zone of existing instance. It has to be replaced. So that's why AWS is replacing that instance. Clear on this point, guys? Destroy and recreate resources whose arguments have changed but which cannot be updated in place due to remote API limitations. Clear? Any confusion here? Now you see that completely the instance ID itself is different. The instance ID itself is different. But is it a tracking everything in the state file? Is it a tracking everything in the state file every time you are running Terraform apply? Yes. Every time when you are running Terraform apply, it is tracking that resource information with the help of that local name. The resource type and the name is a unique way to identify that resource in Terraform in that module. Everything it is tracked here. Everything it is tracked in the state file. And one more condition, if I remove this resource, block completely in the configuration, even though if I apply, is it going to destroy the resource? Even though I apply, is it going to destroy the resource? As I already told, this point we already done the tested also. It is going to destroy the resources. It is going to destroy the resources that exist in the state but no longer exist in the configuration. No longer exist in the configuration. So in my configuration, that resource is no longer existed. In the configuration, that resource is no longer existed, but in the state it is there. but in the state it is there. Now even though I run Terraform apply or Terraform plan to preview, it is saying want to destroy. Why it has to, why it is saying destroy? Because it is not there, in the configuration, but which is there in the state, that's why it is destroying. If I say Terraform apply auto approve, this resource is getting deleted, in the actual infrastructure also, this is getting destroyed, in the actual infrastructure, this resource, and in the state file also it is going to be updated. Once it is successfully deleted, this information will be deleted in the state file also by Terraform only, once the resource is destroyed, it is going to update that state file also. So it is saying destroy completed. Now if I go to state file also, even though there is a state file, is it resource information is deleted like that in the state file also? Yes. Guys, if you understand this resource block, resource behavior, if you understand these concepts, very important. We already discussed so many times because this is so much important. Resource block, resource type, resource arguments, and resource behavior. These are the concepts you need to be familiar in a Terraform if you want to master the Terraform. What is resource block? For what purpose we will use resource block? What do you mean by resource type? What do you mean by resource arguments? What is the resource behavior? If you understand these concepts, you can master in the Terraform. Let it be any resource you want to create, AWS resource or Azure resource or GCP resource or any other resource using whatever providers. This is what we already discussed. Is everyone clear? Now, then it is not like only one resource. Can I create various types of resources of that provider, whatever provider I am using? Can I create various types of resources, whatever is supported by that provider? This is just one resource. Which I am creating. If required, can I create some S3 bucket also using this resource block? S3 bucket. Yes, S3 bucket. Now, this is another resource block. So bucket will expect some arguments. What arguments this is going to expect? Where you can check all these things. Here I am using some plugin. Somehow it is showing, but where I can check what arguments this resource will be expected. You can go to the documentation only. That provider documentation. Let's say S3. Let's go down till S3. Simple storage, and under this S3 there is a resources called AWS S3 bucket. This is the resource type. So I am going to create a resource, S3 resource, something like this. Bucket, some bucket name, you can create S3 bucket, something like this. They have given a sample bucket name. This bucket bucket name. Let me give something like this: Mithun Tech S3 demo using like Terraform. If required, I can give the tags also. If required, I can give the tags, tags for this S3 bucket name. Let's say demo S3 bucket using or demo bucket. Let me just give tag as a demo bucket. Now again I added two resources. Again I added two resources which is not there in the state. Which is not there in the state. Now if I say Terraform apply Terraform plan, is it going to create this resource as well as this resource also in the real infrastructure? Yes. Let me show that. Let me show that. Let me say Terraform plan. Let me show the plan first. Let me show the plan first. Let me show the plan. It is saying two resources to add. Two resources to add. What are those resources? What are those resources? Right? This is one resource. Resource type is AWS instance. Resource type is AWS instance. Resource name, the resource Terraform name. The Terraform local name for that resource is demo. This will be created. AMI I have given, so it is giving AMI is this. But what is the ARN? What is the ARN? What is the associated public IP address? And what is the private IP? What is the security group? What is the subnet ID? All these things they are saying known after apply, known after apply. Like that it is saying. So these other arguments I have not given. So this we will come to know only after applying the resource only. So it is going to create this resource. And there is one more resource, S3 bucket. S3 bucket. This is resource type. This is resource local name in the Terraform. So it is going to create a bucket. This will be created. I have given a bucket name. Bucket name I have given, but what is the ARN for that bucket? Right? What is the ARN for that bucket? And all these things will come to known after apply. ARN, ACL, access control list, all these things are we will come to know after apply. So default values will be applied. Since we are not giving any argument names and its values, default values will be applied. Let me apply Terraform apply -- auto approve. Now if I go to AWS, there will be one S3 bucket also, there will be one EC2 instance also. Now this is getting created. This is getting created again as per my configurations. As per my configurations, it is getting created. This resource and this one also getting created. If I go to S3, if I go to S3, if I go to S3, can I see that S3 bucket getting created? Mithun Tech S3 demo -Terraform. Here, do you see this is getting created today only, March 2nd at 6 o'clock 19 minutes. This one, 2 is created. Now, without making any changes in the configuration, if I run Terraform apply n number of time, it is going to say your infrastructure is up to date like that, because it is going to compare. It is going to compare the real infrastructure with your configuration. It is saying no changes. Your infrastructure matches the configuration. Terraform has compared your real infrastructure against your configuration and found no differences. But let's say, let me update only this one. The tag I am updating. The tag I am updating something like this. Demo. Now, if I say Terraform plan, is it able to identify only what is changed in the configuration by comparing with real infrastructure? Yes. It is saying only one to update. It is saying only one to update. It is saying Terraform plan. It is saying only this has to be updated. One to change. Is your EC2 instance is going to be changed anything? Now, if I apply this one, is your EC2 instances will be modified? That instance, no, because I have modified only this resource configuration, this resource arguments. So it is saying I will update only this one. Let's say Terraform apply auto approve. Now it is getting updated. It is getting updated. If I go to my S3 bucket, if I refresh, only this is getting updated. The tags, we have added a tags for this bucket. You can see that tags basically. You can see the tags for that bucket. So since we updated the tag, for this bucket, so this is updated. This is updated. The tag got updated like this. Now, if there is change in this resource, let's say I am saying t2.micro. Now, only this resource is going to be updated when I say Terraform apply. Even though I am not planning, this Terraform apply will internally create a plan and again it will approve, it will update. So it is saying I am going to update this one, only this resource. So is everyone clear what is resource block, how important the resource block is in Terraform, what is resource type, what is resource arguments, resource behavior? This resource arguments is based on this resource type. Any question, any confusion before we discuss about some other concept here? Now, you need to understand one more thing here. Meta arguments. The Terraform language defines several meta arguments. The Terraform language defines several meta arguments which can be used with any resource type. Meta arguments. The Terraform language defines several meta arguments which can be used with any resource type to change the behavior of resources. We have some meta arguments like depends on, count, for each, life cycle, provisioner, provider, like that. There are various meta arguments. These meta arguments can be used with any resource type. It will change the behavior of your resource again. These meta arguments will change the behavior of resources again. So yesterday at high level I have just explained count. So I can use count for creating multiple resources according to a count. Multiple resources of same type, I can create using this count meta argument. Now here, since I have not defined any count, that is meta argument for any resource. Since I have not defined count, how many resources created for this resource type, how many resources got created of this type using these configurations? Since I have not mentioned, only one resource type, has been created. Now, if required, I can define count. Count is a meta argument. So Terraform language defines several meta arguments which can be used with any resource type. These meta arguments can be used with any resource type. It is going to change the behavior of your resources again. Count is one meta argument. Count for creating multiple resources according to a count. So this is one meta argument, Terraform resource meta argument. Terraform resource meta argument. Count. This count is a meta argument. Count is a meta argument. So this is introduced. This is introduced in Terraform 0.13. This is introduced in 0.13. A given resource or module cannot use both the count or for each. You have a count and for each. You can't use both again. Understand this one. You can't use count and for each both. There are various meta arguments. There are various meta arguments. Understand this one. There is a for each, there is a count. But these two cannot be used together. These two cannot be used together for any resource. In a single resource block, you can't use both. You can't use both. That is what the meaning of this one. A given resource or module block cannot use both the count and for each. You can't use both. So by default, resource block configures only one object, one real infrastructure object. Now, sometimes, however, sometimes you may want to manage several similar objects. However, sometimes you want to manage several same objects, same resources. In some scenarios, you want to manage several same type of resources without writing a separate block. Without writing a separate block, I want to manage several resources. Without writing a separate block. What do you mean by without writing a separate block? I can write something like this also. I can write something like this also. Something like this also I can write. Several same type of resources you want to create. I can do like this, but is it like a duplicate of code? Is it like a duplicate of code? Same type of resource type is same, and resource arguments also same. Resource arguments also same. So sometimes you may need to create a several resources of same type. And sometimes you may want to create or manage several similar resources without writing a separate block for each one. You can use this count or for each. You can use count or for each. If a resource block includes a count argument, whose values is a number. This is just a number. Terraform will create that many resources. Suppose instead of writing like this to create a two resources of same type with same configurations, I can use count. I can use count 1. It should be a value. This is a meta argument, guys. This is a meta argument. Let's say count 2. I'm saying count 2. But I already have one resource. Is it going to create two resources again? I already have one resource. That information is part of the state file. I already have one resource for that resource type. Is it going to create two more resources now if I apply? No. Let me show that. Terraform plan. It is going to say one to add. It is going to say one to add. It is going to say one to add because already there is one resource. Already one resource is there. This is already there. It has just using some kind of a indexing. It is using some kind of a indexing here. So since this is already there, it is not going to make any changes, but with the same arguments, one more resource will be created if I apply. Terraform apply. So count is one meta argument for resource. You can use that count meta argument for any type of resource to create or manage multiple resources of same type, same resource type. Is everyone clear? What is that count meta argument? Is everyone clear? What is that count meta argument? Yesterday someone was asking, can I create a 10 servers? You define count as 10. Is it going to create 10 servers? Yes. Suppose if you say count as 50, is it going to create 50 AWS instances using that resource configurations, that resource arguments? Yes. Is everyone clear on this count meta argument? But let's say I can use count, here, but something will not directly work like this. If I say count as 2, you are expecting this type of resources has 2 resources has to be created for this resource type using this arguments like that you might be expecting. But let me show that. If I say Terraform plan, let's see that what will happen. Now it is saying you may expect, it is saying one more bucket has to be created, one more S3 bucket has to be created, one more S3 bucket has to be created. Now, but there is a limitation in S3. What is the limitation? Bucket name should be unique. Bucket name should be unique in complete AWS. In complete AWS. Bucket name should be unique. When I'm actually creating, we will get a error now. Is the AWS will throw error saying that bucket name error. Now do you see, is it already throwing error when I'm applying? Is it throwing error? It is throwing error. Bucket name already exists. But there is a different way to use unique. There is another provider called random pet. There is another provider called random pet. There is another provider called random pet. So using that random pet, you can get some random names. You can generate some random names and you can use those. You can refer those things in this location. Otherwise, you can use some kind of a indexing. What do you mean by indexing? That you are using a count. That count index. Also you can append to your bucket name. You can append index, something like this. Here, I can do some kind of appending. Let's say something like this. We will understand this variables. What is this? Basically, kind of a variable. You can say count. You are saying count dot index. So for the first time, index will be 0. Second time, index will be 1. Now your bucket names will be something like this. You will have something like this. 0, one bucket with this name, another bucket with this name, like that. Otherwise, if you are not able to do like this, you want to give some unique name, can you duplicate this resource block? If you don't want to do like this, remove the count here. You give whatever name, some different name. You can give a different name like this also by removing the count. Otherwise, you need to somehow pass the bucket name unique, whether you use indexing, whether you use random pet, or whether you use variables, and variables concept also you can use. Now let me explain with this approach. Let's say Terraform plan. Now it is saying 0 to add, 2 to add, 1 to destroy. It is saying 2 to add, 1 to destroy, because bucket name itself I have modified, right? Because bucket name itself I have modified now. The whatever bucket which is already created, that is going to be destroyed and created again. New bucket will be created again, because the bucket name itself is modified. You are going to get a bucket name like this. You are going to get a bucket name like this. One bucket with this name, one bucket with this name. Currently your bucket name is this. Since I have used something like this, force replacement, existing one is force replacement, and it is creating a new one. Now if I say Terraform apply, do I have a two buckets like this? -0, -1. But existing bucket is deleted. Earlier I have a bucket like this. This is replaced. Replaced in the sense deleted and created. Like this. Deleted and created like this, existing one, and new one is getting created. So is everyone clear? You can apply the same thing for tags also. If you want to give a different tag, you can define something like this also. Clear? What do you mean by this count? Count is a meta argument. You can use this count for creating a similar type of resources with same arguments. You can use random pet to generate the random names. You need to use the random pet to generate the random names. That is again one provider. Let's say you don't want to use like this. There is something called random pet provider. There is one provider called random pet. Random pet. So this is the provider. So it is going to support the randomness with Terraform configuration. This is a logical provider, which means that works entirely within Terraform logic. It is not going to interact with any cloud. It is like a logical provider. So if you want to use, you can define provider like this. You can define your provider along with AWS provider. You can define this random provider also, and you can use this random name you need, random ID you need, or a random string you need. Suppose you need some random string, you can create like this. Let me show that. Why to worry? So in my provider block, I am going to define that random whatever version. You can use exact, or you can use this pessimistic, whatever it is. Now I can create a random resource random string. Suppose I need a random string. I can say the local name as random name. I can say local name as random name, random name, random name. And here, what arguments you can use for that random? Length. Do you need a special character? Special. Length. Special. That special will have some meaning again. Those special argument will be used some kind of a special characters. If I don't want special characters, I can say special as false. Length I am saying, let's say eight characters. Random name I need. Special, I don't want any special characters. I can say false like this. Now it is going to give some random name. This I can refer, this resource I can refer in some other AWS Terraform resource. Here instead of hard coding like this, or I can use from here also. Here I can say the resource type, random string dot something like this: random string dot random hyphen string dot random name dot whatever it is going to return, whatever it is going to return, that name, or you can use id, you can use id or name, like that. You can use id, you can use something like this. You can create a random string and you can refer that random string in somewhere else. In somewhere else also you can refer that random string like this as a referencing attribute. As a referencing attribute you can refer something like this. Now you need to initialize, you need to initialize, you need to initialize your Terraform again, because you are using a new provider. Terraform, Terraform init. It is going to download the random provider, that random plugin, that random provider plugin, the random provider plugin. Now let's say Terraform validate. Now it has downloaded that random provider also. Let me use Terraform validate to validate the Terraform syntax errors. Now let me say Terraform plan. Let me say Terraform plan. Now let me say Terraform plan. One second. One second. Here, the way I am using here, it is not correct. So let me use here. It is going to return ID. It is going to return ID. Let's take that ID or name, like that. Let me apply. Let me apply. Let me plan first. Let me plan. Now you are going to get some random name, random name. So you can use that random name here in your Terraform configurations. In your Terraform configurations, you can refer the Terraform configurations. Let me say Terraform apply, Terraform apply now. You can use that random provider to get the some kind of a random numbers or random strings or random, like that. That is another provider you can use to generate the random names or random IDs or random numbers, like this also. Like this also you can use. One second. Only lower characters allowed, because it is giving upper, it is giving upper upper letters also. But as you already know, Terraform, basically AWS S3 bucket should not have any upper case. So here I can say upper false. I can say upper false. Now it is not going to have a uppercase letters in that random string. So let me apply. This is because S3 bucket should not have any upper cases. That random is giving upper cases also. So I have used upper as false, so that random provider, that resource is going to give only normal numbers. But again, S3 bucket problem. Let's see what is this. Already someone has this bucket. Someone has this bucket. Let me increase. Someone already has a bucket, already owned. Someone already owned this one. Let me use more length. Let me use maybe 16 characters length, random 16 characters length. Let me apply. So I'm going to get 16 characters length now. I'm going to get a 16 characters length now. This is another provider, guys. This is another provider. One second. Let's read this. 403. What it is saying? Error, bucket already owned by you. Maybe let me do something because of some limitations. Because of some limitations, it is not working. Let me destroy and create. Okay. Here also I need to use index, guys. Here also I need to use index because this is giving same name. This is giving same name. This is giving same name. You need to have 2 times like this. Here again you need to have 2 times like this. One more like this. One more like this. It is going to give some kind of a random 2 times, two different random strings, two different random strings, two different random strings. So let me say Terraform plan. Guys, this random provider you can use if you want to get some kind of a random names. You can use this random provider. You can use this random provider. This random provider just to get if you need some kind of a random names or numbers. Otherwise, you can use that count also. Otherwise, you can use that count also. Sometimes you may need to get some kind of a random names. So you can use this random provider. You can use this random provider. It is going to support some type of resources like random string. I am getting random strings 2 times, and one bucket I am creating with that random string 1, another bucket with another random string 2, like this. Now let's say Terraform apply. Terraform apply. Hyphen auto approve. Now it is creating 2 resources of S3 buckets using 2 different random strings. Just for demo purpose, I have used this random string. If required, you can use this random string. Otherwise, you use that index count 2, and index of 1, index of 2, like that. Clear? Random provider also. Sometimes you may need to use random providers to get the random names or random numbers. I thought of demonstrating that one also. Is everyone clear? What is this provider? Now you see the S3 buckets. The S3 buckets got created. The S3 buckets got created here. S3 buckets got created here. 2 S3 buckets got created with those random characters. Those random characters. Random characters. Random pet to use in our configuration, we need to add that provider and use in this or it is part of Terraform. This is also one provider. This is also one provider. The way you have a AWS provider, right? The way you have a AWS provider, random is also one provider. So this provider plugin has been downloaded. I am creating a resource of a random string. The way I am created a resource of AWS instance, we created a resource of type random string, and I am referencing that random string here in another resource. In another resource, I am referring this resource like this. This is also one provider. Random string is one provider. Random-string is the resource type from that random provider. Random is one provider. Random-string is the resource type from that random provider to get the random names. You can generate random passwords also like this, random strings also like this. You can see here, right? Random ID, random integer, random password, random pet, random string, like that. So I just created a resource of type random string, and I am referencing that random string in another resource in the Terraform module. So this is how you can use random also. But this is a meta argument. This is a meta argument. This is a meta argument. This is a meta argument for any resource which you can use. Guys, one more way you can do. One more way you can do, right? Something like this. There are, if you understand the concept, the thing simple. Now I am creating two type, two resources of random strings, and here I can refer indexing also. Something like this. I can refer indexing also. I can refer indexing also if required. So here index, let's say I can say count only here. I can say count only here. Count is 2. And here, since I am creating two random strings, and here I can say something like this. Something like this. Something like this. Count, that count dot index. Count dot index. Count dot index. There are various ways you need to understand these concepts. There are various ways you can do like this also. You can do like this also, because I am creating two random strings. So for the first time, first random string name, second time, second random string name. So can I avoid the duplicate code like this also again if required? Meta argument, I am creating two random strings and I am referencing those two random strings here again like this. Clear? Clear on this point also? Count is a meta argument which you can use for any resource type. Count is a meta argument for any whatever you created for resource type. Okay. So I will continue from here tomorrow, guys. But make sure you play around with resource AWS instance type. Play around with meta argument count also. Play around with meta argument with count also. Play around with resource type AWS instance today. I'll continue from tomorrow. I'll continue tomorrow on these other. What do you mean by for each? What do you mean by depends on? What do you mean by life cycle? We'll slowly understand these meta arguments also. These meta arguments you can use for any type of resources. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll stop the session here. I'll continue tomorrow. Today I have took some additional time because I thought of explaining whatever has been discussed yesterday, because still lot of people has a doubt on whatever topics I have explained yesterday. Today again I have explained whatever topics I have explained yesterday, but today we discuss some new concepts, that random provider and also this meta argument like a count, all these things. Guys, practice is very important, and reading the documentation is also very important. Everything is there in the provider documentation. Suppose you are using AWS provider, and what type of resources can be created or managed using AWS provider, and how to use that AWS provider, what arguments you can use for AWS provider, everything is here only. But you need to have a concepts of basics clear, so that you can write infrastructure as a code for any resources. Try to practice whatever has been discussed. I'll continue from here tomorrow. Thank you, guys.